Hello and welcome to Durban for yet another daily Cambridge Nedbank COPpuccino. Today my guests are Tasneem Essop, who is the head of the WWF International Delegation to these negotiations. She is also a commissioner in the South African National Planning Commission. Welcome, Tasneem. My other guest is Carlos Manuel Rodriguez, who was for a number of years the environmental minister in Costa Rica, and as such came to many COPs, I'm sure, with his delegation, and is now the head of the International Policy Program for Conservation International.
Hi.
Welcome, Carlos Manuel. So, why are you here in Durban?
We're really here to stress the urgency, to put pressure on governments, to acknowledge that urgency, and to keep the pressure on for ambitious action.
My interest is really understanding, the politics around sustainability, because this issue of climate change is very concrete. But then we got, the big picture, the big issues around sustainability. How we're going to move out of this business as usual pattern that is killing us in many different ways. It's not killing nature. Nature will live with or without us, but we cannot live without nature. So it's really understanding the politics around these structural changes that we need to promote. And my biggest interest is, how we're going to move out of this business as usual production and consumption pattern towards what we need in the future. And in that context, this COP is extremely important for me and for many people.
What in the last few days that you've been here have you found particularly striking, surprising even?
It's been interesting, the kind of growing acceptance amongst developing countries that they too need to be part of a comprehensive, globally binding deal or agreement in the future. So that has shifted quite substantially from previous COPs, where you had the polarized view of the developed countries, of course, and they have to lead, historical responsibility, all of those issues at play. But in this COP, they've come into this COP, it seems, with a growing sense that developing countries would have to also take responsibility and consider taking those responsibilities in a legally binding way. Clearly, the EU has indicated that they would only take a second commitment period on condition that the developing countries, and especially the major developing countries, agree to some process towards being part of a comprehensive, legally binding agreement.
Human being as a species does not behave like ants and bees, where you have that great level of commitment and species-driven effort. Humans are really different. And I try to understand how they react on these aspects, because it seems like we don't pay attention to what science and the scientists are telling us. I strongly believe that there is no way to avoid the global responsibility on global targets and commitments for all nations of the world. The bad guys, Annex 1 countries, they're responsible, historical responsible. They need to clean their act and pay for the bill. And then we got the non-annex or the rest of the world, standing there doing the business as usual. And it turns out that those good guys are now the big polluters of the world. The case of Costa Rica, my country, is a very small country, a country that has restored forests. No, there's no emission from deforestation. A country that has 92% of our electricity generated with renewables. No emissions from the electricity sector. It's committed to become carbon neutral by 2021, not because there's an agreement or there's a binding responsibility. It's because we see a combination, a blend of a moral, ethical responsibility with the world, but also a market opportunity. We see a great opportunity of being able to compete in a globalized market with carbon neutral products, agricultural sector, industry sector, high-tech sectors, which are based in Costa Rica, are going to be very competitive because the carbon footprint is equal to zero.
The general acceptance of the science amongst especially the major energy-intensive industries, and they can talk about accepting the science, but I don't think it's really hit home the logic of that acceptance of the science. Because if you say we agree we need to keep global warming below 2 degrees, that in effect limits a carbon space. And there's a logic in that. That means that there are going to be limitations to our national carbon space. And so how do you plan for an economy where you are going to have those limits? And the one thing I found out of that process is that I was surprised that that sector did not have really long-term forward planning, which was very interesting from a sector that is essentially having to make long-term investment decisions.
I'm wondering what you see and what you're hearing around COP of the attitude and the role of business.
Well, here, unfortunately, we don't have the whole spectrum of the business community because there are a lot of sectors who are really not interested. And yes, unfortunately, the private sector respond to national policies and international agreements, and we haven't been able to deliver at that level.
Would you share with us one thing that you're really excited about going forward?
The need to fully internalize everything we do positive with nature and internalize everything we do with nature. Use the economics to drive the effort of sustainability. We haven't understand it, how it has worked. And I think that there is no excuse nowadays not to take serious actions in those two fronts. And that does really excites me a lot.
I think, Peter, it's the acknowledgement that so much is happening domestically in any case. I mean, it's interesting, the mismatch between what's going on inside there and what's actually happening on the ground in many of these countries. Countries are sitting in the negotiations, taking really hard lines, are already starting to do things back home in a number of countries. And so I think it's important to understand that the process that we're engaged in here is just part of a bigger picture.
It's been a delight and an inspiration to have you both with me on the COPpuccino.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tasneem, Carlos, Manuel.